Welcome back to the Becoming Limitless podcast. I hope you have been having a great week, but I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered, how am I going to make time for my health and start being consistent if I'm working so often in my business? I just don't have the time to fit it all in. Well, that's actually the aha moment that Sarah Young came to. And that's what we're talking about on today's podcast. Now, Sarah is an entrepreneur, an investor, a money pro, a business coach, and she works with female founders. She has multiple businesses, including Young and Co. And also she coaches women and successful entrepreneurs on really finding freedom and making life-changing money in their businesses. And what we're talking about today is the path that allowed her to become consistent with her health while being a mom, a multiple business owner, and dealing with that internal battle that we have with perfectionism. I'm so excited to hear for you to hear this. Sarah Young is actually a past client of mine. We worked together for 2 years and we got all the pieces in place. But what you're going to hear is the really cool story of the one conversation that she had with her husband that totally flipped the script in her business, had her restructuring it from the ground up so that it supported the life she wanted, the changes that she made and put in place so that she'd have time to focus on her health, so that she felt like she was living into the identity she wants to be. You'll hear her called the millionaire lady Sarah. That's the identity she gave the version of her that needed to create this space in her business and life to become a healthy mom who was just really enjoying her life. So I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode today as I interview Sarah on her journey to becoming consistent with her health while running a multiple six-figure business. Today's guest is Sarah Young, and I absolutely love the work that she does. But there was something that she said on an Instagram story a couple of weeks ago that had a light bulb moment go off in my head. And the cool thing is like Sarah and I used to work together. Was it been about a year and a half ago now? About then? A
Yeah,
year ago?
last February, March 2023, I think was when we stopped
Yeah.
ish.
Yeah, but it was an aha moment she had. And I think it was related to a conversation with your husband that we're going to discuss that
Yep.
really kind of lit the fire for consistency. And that's what really it is. I mean, we all know bedtimes, we know healthy foods, we know all the things, but it's that consistency piece. And so one of the things that we've been doing over the last several episodes on the podcast is really digging into consistency, into what it means and looking at it from a ton of different angles. And I thought that the angle that Sarah talked about, which we're going to go into a bit of a deep dive today, is going to really just open your mind into something you may not have considered. And so I'm not going to spoil it for you, but let's jump in. Sarah, would you love to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about your business. We'll go from there.
Yeah. So I do many things. My first business that I started is Young and Co., and we provide strategic financial services for pretty rapidly growing service-based businesses. We do virtual CFO, tax, accounting. That was my first business baby. That has been going on for almost 6 years now, and we've got a team of 10 over there. It's just crazy how fast it's grown. And we'll talk about the catalyst for the second business, but my second business is about a year old. I was sort of doing it before then, like coaching programs and things on the side of Young and Co. It was almost like my side hustle to Young and Co. And then last year I made it an official whole second business. So there I definitely bring some, money and financial element into overall business, we'll talk about like building freedom through your business, but it's really about how do you reach financial freedom and time freedom with your business? Stop overworking, stop staring at your laptop all the time. How do you pay yourself a consistent paycheck and grow your business and build wealth? And that is everything that I teach over there. I'm also a mom. And I mean, I think those are all the interesting things about me.
And we like to walk.
Yes. I literally just walked before this. I'm a little bit sweaty because it's going to rain later. And so I was like, I'm going to go get my walk in before our call.
I love that. I got a walk in this morning as well. And it's one of those mornings where it's like it's freshly sunny, but the air is still really moist. I could feel my hair
Yeah.
slowly fluffing.
Yeah. Same. If you're watching the video of this, you can see my frizz starting, but it's fine. We don't care.
It's all good. It's all good. So okay, I love that to set the stage for that. Now, where I kind of wanted to go was tell it as a story. Like, let's go to the beginning. So this, I would say almost the beginning is like, what was this moment right before we started working together? Because I know you had some stuff you found out about your health and stuff like that that had made you realize that maybe focusing just on business isn't what I want to do anymore. So if you could tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, well, so I'll actually go back farther than that. I grew up in the South of the United States, which is not widely known for being a very healthy place. And my family definitely had no the health and food and exercise. I was not athletic as a kid. I never viewed myself as being any sort of athlete. I just never thought about it. And then there was some class, I can't even remember the class in college, but I read this book. I think it was called Mindless Eating. And it was the first book I read where it was talking about from like a marketing lens, like how all these food companies, put all this crap into our food. And I was like, what in the world? And then that sent me down ever since then. I graduated in 2009. So for 15 years, I'm a lot crunchier than people think that I am in terms of like all natural sorts of things, which is probably why I like Tanessa so much.
We're crunchy
Um,
here.
yeah, yeah. So then actually, it was not too long after I graduated college that my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so Alzheimer's runs on both sides of my family. My maternal grandmother had Alzheimer's. My dad had it. He had type 2 diabetes and then got Alzheimer's, and he passed away in 2021, right before we started working together, actually. His older brother, same thing. Their dad, same thing. They all, passed away at a pretty young age. And then lots of other diabetes and strokes and all the things in my family. And so I think it was around the time, it was like that Black Friday, I think, that one of those, the 23andMe or whatever, they did the sale on their, health DNA test. So I got it and I saw that I have two copies of the Alzheimer's gene, the APOE4, which then I started reading all these books about Alzheimer's and the gene. Dale Bredesen is one, if anybody's listening who has this. It's called The End of Alzheimer's. I loved that book. And that really sent me off on this sort of mission, if you will, of this is something I need to prioritize, just knowing how early on, especially when you have the genetic predisposition, how early in life some of these things can start in your brain. Um, and then it just sort of compounds over time. And so then I think it was not long after that that we started working together back in, I think it was November 2021.
Yeah, it was the very
So
end of the
long
year.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this has been an ongoing journey. But was it like that moment? Was it in that time when you got that test result back that you're like, oh, this needs to be done? Or had it been something that you'd kind of been thinking about for a while, given how much you'd grown your business already?
I it was always on the back of my mind. So I had my son in March 2020. He was born 2 weeks before COVID, and I was still full time in my corporate job. And I had planned after maternity leave to quit. And then he was born, then COVID happened. I decided to quit anyways. And then I very quickly just threw all of it out the window. I mean, before pregnancy, I was much more consistent with being healthy. I did all the things. I exercised more. I was doing like Whole30s to help with migraines and all those things. And I had no problem doing it. And it was a combination of like having my son, going full time in Young and Co, plus COVID, let's be real, that just basically I threw everything out the window. And then I actually had gotten some blood work done. It was in the spring of 2021. I scaled my business up from side hustle. I was doing like 10 to 15K months within like 6 months of going full time. And but I was also working every night. I was working on the weekends. I was running myself into the ground, plus having a 1 year old. And I got some blood work done, and I think it was like some thyroid, some hormone issues. There was like all sorts of things just pointing to super high stress. Something needs to change. And then actually from there, I stopped taking on clients at Young and Co and totally revamped my business model, which was like the first major shift that I made was back in that spring, and ended up just switching the business model so that it was easier for me to run, easier for me to grow, easier for me to hire a team throughout 2021. So by the end of 2021, we were at like 25, 30K months. I had a full-time team member. My life was so much easier, but I still was struggling to be consistent with health.
Yeah, I remember every time tax season, I think we went through 2 full years together. Every time tax season rolled around, it'd be like, okay, this is the year we're going to figure out like what is our baseline for habits, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We won't talk about, well, this year was better. Every year has been better. And there were still things that I definitely could have improved, but compared to previous years, yeah, it was a lot better this year.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we're in this place right now where you're just like, I need to take care of my health. I need to figure this out. We started working together without going too much into detail because I want to talk about this after. What are some of the big things that made the biggest difference from our time together that you were like, okay, these are big pieces that I need to incorporate going forward?
I think the biggest thing that stuck with me the most, that still sticks the most, is the sleep, just being the foundation. And that's something too that in my coaching, when I talk, I mean, I work with women, I work with a lot of moms who we feel like the nighttime after our kids go to sleep is the only time we get to ourselves, right? And because during the day you're in your business and you don't take time for yourself either. And so learning to shift the sleep habits around so that I'm more consistently sleeping, I think is the foundation. And it's now something I like preach, not that I know how to fix it. I'm like, Tanessa knows how to fix it. But like, if you're not sleeping, you're not going to be able to do anything else. So I would say that was like the number one thing that I think had like the biggest, fastest impact for sure.
Yeah, I always remember being able to look at your data from your Aura ring, and I could always tell the nights that you picked back up work just by looking at your sleep data. It made a
Yeah.
profound difference on your ability to almost on your sleep time and your quality sleep. Like I could pick it out
Yeah.
from just looking at data.
Yeah, no, I still do. I mean, if I work after Jackson goes to bed, I mean, he goes to bed by like 7:30 at the latest. And so, I've got a couple hours and I used to think, "Oh, it's a couple hours. I can get some work done." But just the fact of turning your brain back on after, being off since like 3:34, turning it back on, it's hard to then shift back into sleep mode and then actually be able to go to sleep. So, yeah, I mean that had to change and that still happens. I mean, it happens sometimes. You have to work late, right?
Mhm.
But I do my best to not to not pick things up, and I'm sure we'll go into it. I think a lot of it comes down to, the fear of if I don't do this now, then you start spiraling about what's going to happen to your business. And I think I also tell people too, like a lot of it comes down to these like really seemingly inconsequential choices that you make, right? Like it doesn't seem like a big deal that I'm going to like review this one thing or make a piece of content for 30 minutes at night before I go to bed. Except in the moment, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but then it just has this compound like ripple effect on everything else you do. Or for me, my struggle has always been like the end of the workday. And I'll just answer one more email. It's like, do I stay and answer emails or try to get one more thing done? Or do I stop and go exercise or go cook dinner or whatever it is? And it seems in the moment like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'll just do it this one time, except it's every time that you don't realize it, right? So I
Yeah.
think learning that piece too was really important.
Yeah, for sure. And so, like, I remember at the end of our time together, I feel like you had all the pieces that you needed. And it was just like struggling to find the time to do them, the energy, the consistency, right? Finding that, right? And so, I want you to tell us a little bit about what happened next. So, we had stopped working together. You're like, I need to run this on my own. And you had a conversation with your husband. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so it was February 2023, and it was just one of those. We were literally sitting at the breakfast table, and my husband doesn't remember the conversation, which is so funny. But for me, it was such a light bulb. So it was, of course, in the middle of tax season. And at the time, I was doing probably like 50 to 60K in revenue every month. And we have mostly, or had at the time, mostly recurring contracts. And I mean, that's a lot of volume. I had help on the accounting side, and I was obviously being the CFO for clients, but I didn't have a ton of tax help. I had some like very part-time contractor help. And for whatever reason, I was just holding on to it. I know why I was, which I'll get to, but I was holding on to that work. And it was February, and I was sitting at the breakfast table, like complaining about how much I hated my life during tax season. And my husband says to me, he's like, this is a choice. Like, that you are actually choosing to stay stuck doing these things over and over again because, you know, I'm all about money, not all about money, but like I talk a lot about money stuff and I hadn't been like obsessively tracking my net worth or anything, but we actually sat down and realized like, oh my God, at some point in the last 6 months, we crossed into the 7-figure net worth range. we could technically, if we wanted to, that amount wouldn't support our lifestyle currently. But like, there's a world where if I really wanted to, I could make a different choice and, sell my business, walk away, and we would be fine. We wouldn't have to work. Right. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, like he's right. I am making the choice. And so I thought about it over the next couple months during the crazy busy time. What I realized is that it was my identity that I had built in the busyness. It all comes back to fear, right? The fear of like letting go of that, holding on to the tax work, even though like I hate taxes. I like to save people money on taxes. I like the strategic piece that it plays into your overall like business and financial plan. But like the actual act of doing tax returns, it is the worst. And, but I realized that that was the last piece of like truly busy work that I was holding on to. And that once I let go of that, I was going to actually have to be the person that I kept saying I wanted to be. Right. And when I realized that, I said, okay, it is a choice that I'm making. And now I'm going to choose differently. And so I will say in the year and 4 months since then, I started business number 2 because the coaching stuff that I do is honestly like the most fun that I have ever had. Like I love doing it. And I held back from really going full throttle on it because of the fear of all kinds of things, right? I was afraid to go. I was afraid to do it. I was afraid to step away from Young and Co. I hired a full-time tax person. I hired another full-time tax person. We ended up buying another business. I got more consistent with my health. I started to garden this past year. Like that triggered in my brain just like the freedom of being able to do these things. And so what I'm working on now, what I'm trying to help people do is realizing I didn't have to wait until that moment to make that choice. Like you don't have to wait until you have a certain amount of money in the bank to feel like the safety to go and do the things, right? I wish I hadn't waited so long, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I love this because we used to talk about gardening as like one of those things that relaxed people did, or like people who had time did. My gardens
Yeah.
failed so many times over, but I'm glad yours is working. So this is really neat. So what I'm hearing is that the way that you had set up your business wasn't allowing you the space and the time to be healthy, coupled with that fear of like, if I change my business to make time, I have to become that person or face the
Yeah.
fact that I'm not doing it.
Yeah. Well, it was really like, who am I if I'm not busy?
Mm,
Right?
yeah. Yeah.
That's
So
some
you
deep
made these
stuff.
changes to your business. And what was it like then that next step? So you're in the fear. Now, you've opened up the time, you've hired the 2 tax pros, you're bringing in the coaching side of it, which allows for more flexibility. What were the next things that you did in that space to be able to start getting consistent?
Yeah. Well, we started talking about this right at the very end, which was the idea of the minimum baseline, which is something that I first heard described in this particular way on Carl Lowenthal's podcast, who just came out with a book. I haven't read it yet, but I want to. But she describes the perfectionist like cycle that you go through, which describes me to a T. And I had never heard perfectionism described in that way. So I remember I shared with you the podcast episode where she talks about it. And I was like, this, she has no idea who I am, to be clear.
I'm
But
going to link
like,
this episode in the description, by the way, because I've listened to it when Sarah shared it. And I was like, oh, the
yeah,
cycle. I see it.
yeah. So she, but like I'll summarize and then you guys should go, I'll go listen to the episode. But she basically says that if we have these perfectionist tendencies, that we envision this perfect life in our head, and that gives us the feel good hormones, right? It makes us feel good when we imagine in our head how perfect everything's going to be when we finally do all the things. And then we say, okay, I'm all of a sudden going to be this person starting Monday, right? Or starting next week, whatever it is. And then you try to do all the things, but you do too much. You don't have the habits built up. You don't have the identity of that person who's going to do the thing. And so you fall flat on your face and you fail. And then you give yourself a really hard time about it. In your head, you beat yourself up. And so the only way you feel better is to, again, go back to having perfectionist fantasies. And so she says the antidote to that is the minimum baseline, which is something I've heard also in a lot of other habit books. Like I think they talk about atomic habits, right? Like starting with a really tiny, small habit So I decided in that February, March timeframe that I had zero excuse anymore for not prioritizing health, given how important I keep saying it is to me. So I started with the very small habit of going for like, I think it was 2 walks a week for 10 minutes. I said, I'm just going to go twice a week, 10 minutes. I have no excuse not to do that. And in your brain, you tell yourself, this is not enough to make me healthy, which is true. It's not enough. It's not a complete like health habit, but also it's better than nothing, which is what you do if you keep getting stuck in that loop. So for the month of March, I actually still have it in my like Apple Watch data. I did 2 walks a week every week in March. And then after a while, I increased it to 15 minutes. And then I increased it to 3 days a week. And I just sort of slowly from March, I guess March, April, May, that's literally all I did was walking. I didn't do anything and just sort of slowly increased it. And when that felt easy, when it felt like second nature, then I added on the next layer where there was actually a personal training studio that opened up 5 minutes from my house in the shopping center where we go to Trader Joe's and get groceries all the time. Like literally right there by my house, owned by a woman, a private place. And I was like, okay, this is a sign from the universe. Like, Sarah, go here. So I walked in, I met with her, and I've been there for a year now. We had our workout this morning, and I was like, I started here almost a year ago. Like, it is insane. So when walking felt easy, then I started with 3 workouts a week. For me, the personal trainer aspect was really important because, like, I knew how to work out, I knew what I needed to do. I would do group training, yoga classes, spin classes, whatever, Peloton, like do at home. I tried all the things, but none of it ever sticked and are stuck. For me, I think the element, I don't know if it's the cost or the accountability piece of like I have that person who is there like waiting for me. And it's also she changes it up and like customizes it and it's fun that I've been going pretty consistently, unless I've been sick or traveling for a year, 3 times a week. Like I have never in my life been that consistent. So I started that in late June 2023. And then after a couple of months, when that felt easy, it was September 2023, I added in the food. So I started logging my food and tracking macros, trying to eat more protein, not even necessarily meal prepping, just tracking what I was eating. I got a meal prep service for lunch that went a long way to help. So then I started doing that and I focused on that from September through February, except with the exception of the holidays. And then I think in February, I had lost from doing that almost 15 pounds,
Yeah,
like
that's amazing.
including the holidays.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? And then I stopped. I hate tracking my food. So I stopped in February when I hit my goal weight. And I'm just like maintaining it and it's not an issue anymore. And so then, more recently, instead of buying the meal prep lunches because I got tired of them, I've started a weekly, like actual meal prep habit on Sunday. So just like keep stacking the habits until now. I mean, I'm doing almost all the things, like certainly not perfectly well. And then it's like working on the next goal, which is for me, it's cardio. Like I feel like my cardio fitness could be better. And so adding on top of that, more running and stuff like that, since it's summertime and nicer outside.
Yeah.
That was
What
a
I'm
long
hearing is
answer.
an underlying theme of like, my perfectionist brain is telling me this is not enough, do more, but this hasn't worked. And so what it sounds like has led to your success is like, I started small. I started with 2 walks. Then I went to, after being super consistent for like 3 months of then going to workouts, then it was tracking food. Then it was adding in meal plan, like very small steps. And the other thing I think is
Yeah,
cool that you said is you hit your goal weight. What did you say? It was down 15 pounds?
almost. Yeah, like 13,
Yeah.
14.
But that didn't take 2, 3 months. That took, how
No.
long would you say it took? Almost a year, right? Something in that range?
Yeah, from the time I started in March until, yeah, I hit it in February.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you know what's interesting is postpartum baby number two, it took me exactly a year to lose 15 pounds. And I think it's so interesting to hear you say this. And I also have to confirm that with my experience is that we think that this should be a 6 week challenge, a 3 month thing. And we get so discouraged. I've been in that mindset before. I imagine you have too. But what was it this time that was like, it's okay if this takes longer? Because you ended up getting there. And now that you're there, it probably feels great. But what was it that kept you going in those times where it was like, oh, we're not there yet?
Oh, that's a good question. This, to me, it goes back to like my coaching I give to my clients when they want it all now. right? And I say it's about the process, right? Whether it's your business or your health or whatever it is, like we want all the things now, we want the rewards now. But I think it's almost like restructuring how you view like time in a way of
Mhm.
just becoming that person who is that right now, even if you don't necessarily have all of the external signs of being that person that you want to be or living the life that you want to have, and shifting to just being like, I enjoy the process. I'm doing things for fun. Um, and then letting go of the pressure on yourself to do all the things. I think anytime I hear a client or myself in my head say anything along the lines of like, I should, I need to, I have to, I've got to do this. Any of those phrases, when I hear those words uttered, my little radars go up and I'm like, oh no, this is just your brain is talking, right? But how many times have I gone through in 4 years since Jackson was born? How many times did I go through that cycle of starting, trying, failing over and over and over again? And so I think I also finally, like, you have to be ready, right? You
Mhm.
have to be ready to say, like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. And it's your ego too, right? Your ego is telling you, like, I know what to do. I should be able to do this. Why is this so hard? And so I think you have to like humble yourself a little bit and let go of that and just say, you know what? It's okay if I don't have hit the goal weight in 3 months. It's more about building the sustainable habits and like taking on the identity of the person that you say you want to be.
I love this piece that you keep bringing it back to the sustainability. Now, if you would have done all of the more like say far end stuff, in your opinion, to lose weight instead in 6 weeks, 10 weeks, do you think it would have been as sustainable as it having taken the full year?
No, there's no way.
And I
No.
bet this makes you such a good coach too. And you're now knowing like, okay, I know how to delay that gratification. I know it's coming and it's fine. Just going to keep doing the work.
Yeah. Well, it never lasts. We
Mhm.
know this. Logically, we know this, but I mean, our brains, I think it's so interesting to read about the way our brains work. Fun fact, when I started college, I was a pre-med student and I did all the biology and chemistry and I wanted to do neuroscience. And so obviously that was not for me, but I still think it's really interesting. I just think it's really interesting to also have this understanding of like, it's not necessarily your quote unquote fault that you're doing these things. It's literally how your brain is wired that is making you inclined to want the instant gratification, like to want to go out and hunt or gather or whatever and like find the food and like win immediately
Mhm.
to make you feel like you're safe. So I think it also helps to recognize that and then be more intentional about like when it happens, when this like thought pattern comes up to rewire that back into just being okay to feel safe and like trusting the process.
Right. And in trusting that process, you now have the habit of walking, the habit of working out, the habit of whether or not you're tracking, you now know about how much protein to eat in a meal by eyeball now because you have that practice.
Yep.
You know what the meal planning does for you know what the sleep does. Like there are so many things that you now have as part of your identity because you allowed it to take longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
Because you have to build the habits, right? I don't
Mhm.
remember the stat. I don't know if you know it, but what like the percentage of the things that we do in a day that are just habit.
Oh, it's probably like 90%.
Yeah.
It's really
Because
high.
again, like our brains are wired to be lazy, to conserve energy, and you conserve energy by just doing the default. And that's why it's so hard to make a change because internally it's like, I don't want to make a change, right? It's like, I think you told me to read Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself,
Yeah.
which I recommend to
So good.
people too. And in that book, he talks about, I think he references it like having ruts in a road, like from where the tires go over and over again, and how hard it is if you've ever driven off road or like in a four-wheeler. My country may be showing a little bit, but like getting out of the ruts and going off the path is so difficult. Right. And it's the same way with your neurons in your brain, even for bad habits, which I thought was fascinating. Like your body becomes so accustomed to the cortisol or like just the negative things you're doing that it feels safe and like no expecting that you're going to do that bad habit that you want to change, that it makes it even harder to change into a quote unquote good habit.
Yeah, you know
I just
what's
think
funny
it's so
that you bring
interesting.
that up? This is just the universe and it's all its synchronicities. I just randomly got a trial to the Gaia app. Have you heard of the Gaia app?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm watching Joe Dispenza. He's the author of this book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. He's done like a 14 episode series on rewiring your brain. And literally, the one I listened to this morning was about it was something like only 5% of our ability in our brain is conscious, and the rest is subconscious. And when we try to change, we change from the conscious without actually looking at all that programming that is in there that's saying, I can't, I don't know how, I've always been this way. And our brain always seeks the known, especially if we are perfectionists. We experience anxiety. We have any type of need for control of the situation is we always seek out the known. But if you want to
Hmm.
change, you have to be in the unknown. And so it's one of these really cool things. Anyways, if you want to watch that docu series on Gaia, it's so interesting. It's a good play on the book. It's a good summary of the book, but really recognizing that you need to get beyond yourself and who you are now and how you make decisions and how you show up in the world and start stepping into the unknown. And it's great. But I love that
Yeah.
you said that.
Well,
Um,
and that goes back to what I said about realizing that I had structured my business around what I was comfortable doing because I came from, I think we all have these like sort of underlying deep fears and beliefs from when we were children. And mine was always that my hard work and my academic success is what people love me for. Certainly not like I was an awkward kid with like braces and buck teeth. So it wasn't the way I looked. And it
Me
wasn't
too.
my athletic skills. It wasn't my social skills. It wasn't any of that. It was my academic success. So then what do? I get straight A's. I go to college. I do all the things. I'm in all the extracurriculars. I went into public accounting. I went into the corporate world and then I started my business and I just kept doing all those habits because I structured around what I was comfortable doing, which was putting my head down and working myself into the ground
Yeah.
for
Do you
the for that
find that
reason.
for being a good student, because I was the same way, I was like straight A's all the way through university. That almost gave me this sense of like, if I do this, I can control the outcome because I found school was such a I have a really good memory. Like I can look at a page and it's a borderline, like I would say tipping into photographic memory, my memory. And so in sciences, like I literally could just look at a page, I'd call up that page during an exam, copy it out, like 100% across the board. It was such a predictable, controllable outcome. But when I started my
Mhm.
business and the lack of control in that brought on a lot of the anxiety and like,
Yeah.
do you find that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, the more that I feel like in the last year and a half that I have leaned into changing the way that I run my life and my business and leaning less into, hard work equals success, like my business hasn't, burned to the ground because I work less, right? It's been fine. And actually, counterintuitively, I think things are better because I'm now embodying like the person that a lot of people want to be. And that feels weird to say that, but right, it is. And so like again, like stepping into being the identity, taking on the identity of the person you keep saying you want. And you keep saying you want all these things, but you're not acting the way that you want. And so that's really been like my journey over the last year and a half.
Who is that identity for you that you're either in now or still moving towards?
I call it millionaire lady Sarah.
Lady
That's
Sarah.
yeah.
I love it.
Um, and though some of the words that come to mind for me are like luxuriating,
Mm.
play, joy. A lot of the things I never like allowed myself because again, like the way that I was raised was work hard first and then you maybe get to play, but there's a lot of guilt around not. But I take a lot of my clients through this like vision exercise. We think about what do you want to be and how do you want to act. And millionaire lady Sarah, spends a lot of time outside sitting on her deck. She's got a garden. She's a really great mom. She's really present and also having an impact on other people is something I think is really important too. But yeah, I call her millionaire lady Sarah. And I ask myself all the time, even though technically I am a millionaire, I am a lady and I am Sarah, like I still ask myself, like, what would millionaire lady Sarah do? What would millionaire Sarah do in this moment to
I
remind myself to be that?
I love that. Mine is fit CEO mom.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I am a fit. Technically, I run my business CEO and mom, but there's just something it's about her. And I love that luxuriating, that luxurious feelings. I totally get that. Okay, so the last thing I kind of want to dig in with you is like, okay, so you're at this point now where you are so involved in the day to day and doing all the things in your business, and you didn't have time to do the stuff that you wanted to do to be um, millionaire lady Sarah. But I just love this so much. I need to name mine. Mine needs a better name now. But so let's just say somebody's listening right now and they are burning the candle at both ends. They are 9 hours a day in their business, 10 hours a day in the business, or they're working 7 days a week because they can. Maybe they don't have kids yet, or maybe they do, and they're working after bedtime right till midnight just because they think it's going to make them feel better, more successful, create an outcome. How would you, I mean, in your experience, what would you say to this person? Like, if they want to make room for their health and we see that they don't have time for it and it's a way that they're structuring their business, where would you start with somebody like that?
Yeah, there's a few places I always start. Number one, I always tell people a lot of when you come into any of my programs, one of the first things you're going to do is remove something from your calendar. We do this whole exercise of like vision and goals and what do you want? And then I'm saying, okay, now you compare what you're doing now. We're going to get rid of something that's not in alignment, whether that is an offer, that is the client, that every time you see their name pop up, it sends your blood pressure skyrocketing. Maybe it's a team member who's not aligned. It's the way that you're structuring your calendar, the meetings that you put, allowing people just more access to you, not maintaining your boundaries. And so it's like the garden metaphor, right? Like we have to prune back things in order to make space, to make more space for a millionaire lady Sarah or whatever your person's name is to come in and have the space for. So I think it's like being clear on what are the things you can get rid of first, because we can't just like add more in when you're already overworked. You gotta pull things back, and that is scary for people. Like every time I have people do that exercise, they look at me like, are you serious? You want me to get rid of this whole offer? You want me to fire my clients? Like, sure do. And then they do it and it ends up being amazing, right? And then the other thing that I find too is I think people have really overcomplicated the way that they run their businesses. So, the way I talked about my 2021 journey of I started off doing in my business the lower ticket, higher volume, over delivering model because I thought I had to get clients, even with the background that I have. Like I like being high up in finance in corporate, going through public accounting, having the licenses and experience. I still didn't think that people would want that from me. Um, I think people overcomplicate their businesses though, and do it again out of the fear that if they do the things they truly want or charge the price they truly want, or if they don't show up and like, as my husband says, shake it on social media all the time, then they're not going to be successful. So I always tell people, I think you're a successful business is boring. And that's hard for a lot of us as entrepreneurs because we most of us anyways really love to try new things and we have to be the visionary and to come up with the big ideas. But if you really zoom out and think about it, a successful business is one where you know exactly what to do. You know exactly how to generate leads. You know exactly what offers they're going to get. You know how your team is going to deliver on those. You know how you're going to put money in your bank account, right? And you just do that over and over and over again. And then it's boring and it's hard for us to go and just keep doing that over and over again, which is part of why I did some of the other things I did last year, right? Once we got Young and Co stabilized in that way. Um, to give myself the room for play to do all these other fun things. And so really we come up with a really simplified business model. A lot of it, I start with offers. I almost always look at offers first and pricing because that will have the fastest impact on cash flow and your bottom line. If you're like constantly running out of cash, or even for the people who I find some people just hoard cash in their bank account because they're afraid it's going to run out because they're not confident in the offers and then their marketing that they have. So just creating that really simple structure that's easier to maintain while also shedding some of these things on your calendar are the first things I do. And then the other piece too, like the third piece would be to be the mindset stuff. Like you've heard me talk about identity, habits, fear, all that stuff. I don't think any of this like business or money work is complete if you're not also addressing everything that's running through your head 100,000 times a day. to begin to rewire that and change the way that you show up so that you can be that person.
Hmm. Okay. So what I'm hearing is like we need to start looking at your offers first of all, and like, are are you doing more than you need to do? Right. And it's interesting when I did this with my business, I couldn't believe how much stuff I was doing that I saw no financial return on, but somehow thought I needed to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And once I started recognizing, I'm like, oh, well, for me, I think like 95% of my revenue comes from podcast interviews that I do. I don't know. Do you remember where you found me? Do you remember?
Somebody shared a post on Instagram. I shouldn't say that to you. I know we were just talking about Instagram.
Well, you know what? Okay, so like I think you're probably one of two or three clients that have ever found their way through Instagram. But honestly, most come from like, I heard you on this podcast interview. And so when I found for me, like, oh, I'm spending all this time on this and this is only generating 10% of the revenue, it makes way more sense to focus over here,
Mhm.
right? It's kind of like oh, there's a book right now that I was reading while we were in Panama. I think it was by Dan Martell, and it was about focusing on that narrow window of stuff that you are exceptional at and letting the rest fall away, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the same idea as 10x is easier than 2x.
That's the book.
The same thing. Yeah.
Is that Dan Martell? That's the book I was
It's
reading.
why am I blanking? Dan Sullivan. Is it Dan Sullivan? I'm probably
I
not
don't know.
saying the
You know
right
what?
thing.
I read it and I can't hear 10x. I'm going to Google it right now. It is by um Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. Okay, I was
Yeah.
right on the Dan, just not the last name.
Yes. Yeah. Um, no, I mean, it's true. I think that people do that because you think you have to, and because you have this scarcity mentality of, oh no, what if I do drop that 10%? And then what if my podcast interviews start failing? And then what if my whole business crumbles? And you just like spiral into this doom loop, right? And the funny thing is, I think a lot of these things go on behind the scenes and you don't even realize that you're taking yourself there. So doing too many things, but I also think it comes down to not really truly taking the time to understand where clients come from and to understand which of your offers is the most profitable so that you know what to hone in on. I think you are different in that you also really like data and you also have a very good understanding of money and financial concepts given your whole
Financial
financial
freedom life.
independence, right? Which is not normal for most people. And so I think I see a lot of business owners just don't take the time to understand that, which then would, of course, prevent you from being able to make the decision about what to focus on too.
Oh, I love that. The one last thing I think would be really interesting to share is I know right at the end of when we were working together, we started paying attention to what was that limit of calls per week. You found that there was a very specific limit at
Yep.
which if I do more calls than this, the week just falls apart. And then I know you've evolved it since then. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Because I
Yeah.
think most of us don't even recognize that. Like you'll hear Sarah talk about it. I thought it was
Yeah.
cool. Go for it.
I did already coming in have my client calls and sales calls limited to certain days of the week. Certainly, I'd already done that. But then I just during busy times, just with the call slots I had, I would get to where I think and it wasn't even client calls, it was just anything, client calls, podcast interviews, team, all of it. I think it was like 7 or 8 for me. The weeks where I had 10 to 12 appointments where I had to be like face to camera with somebody, I was exhausted. I'm an introvert naturally, and I'm also a manifester human design wise. So I have very much like my energy levels can be all over the place, right? Um, so I started limiting my calls, but actually, I can't even remember when I made this change. I think it was last summer. I think it was last summer. I started having client free weeks and not just one, but like I now only currently have two I call them on my calendar client facing weeks. So I only open up 4 days a month for calls, for client calls and sales calls.
And what would you like 3 years ago have thought of that?
Oh my God. Everyone's going to hate me. They're all going to be so mad. They're all going to leave. And then again, spiraling, my business is going to fail. Everyone's, going to think I'm so stupid and whatever. It's been fine. Nobody's complained. And actually, we're in the process now of promoting one of my other team members to be the CFO for Young & Co. So I'm actually in 3 months, I'm not going to have any calls for that business outside of like a handful that I'll probably stay on with, but it'll be like 1 or 2 a month. Um, Yeah, so I took it down to having only 2 weeks a month, 4 days of client calls. And it's because I found on the days where I have specifically the client calls really are because I put so much into what I do. I use my brain so heavily. And I'll also say, like, talking about money stuff and business for people can be triggering. And so, also, sometimes I am people's therapist. And so, it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so, I found that if I overdo it, it makes it just impossible for me to do anything else. So, structuring it so I have now 2 to 3 weeks of no client calls has been able, like, it has just enabled me to have those weeks of like very focused work time to do the behind the scenes things and the projects and the marketing to move things forward. And the other thing I'll say, I haven't talked about this a ton on Instagram yet. I've mentioned it, but I decided, I think it was last week, I woke up one day, I was like, I'm going to take a month off.
I
I'm going to take
love
a
it.
whole month off
Sabbatical.
of,
Why not?
yeah, a little mini sabbatical. Yeah. So I'm going to take a whole month off. Partly just because I need a break. And then partly because um, I have a team of amazing people, and me being gone, I'm hoping will show us that they can rise up to the occasion and fully run that business without me being there all the time. And if anything breaks, we'll fix it. It'll be fine.
See, I love there's so much flexibility in that too. It allows you to have the time to go for a workout. It allows you to have time to make sure you make a lunch, right? Because I meant, have your hours, weekly hours changed at all too? Are you still working the same amount or they just look different?
I work, and I think sometimes too, we have to redefine like what is work
Mm.
when you are a business owner. I do, more traditional laptop time work. I haven't added up. I mean, max 30 hours a week, but that's two businesses that I'm doing, right? It's usually about 25. I'll get up in the morning and do some sort of like content planning, writing sorts of things for a little while when it's quiet. And then I go work out after my son goes to school, go work out. And then I'll go back to my office from usually like, I don't know, 11 to 4, Monday through Thursday. And then Fridays, I try to work less. Some days I do content batching too. So it varies. But yeah, it has enabled my schedule to be so much more flexible. And then in the time where I'm at work, I'm also that much more productive. So I get more done, honestly, in that time than I would have before.
Well, this is cool because I remember when we started, you had this goal, which felt like a pipe dream of like 25 to 30 hours a week. So it's cool to hear you say it changes a little bit, but 30, and then there's not a lot of client facing days. Like this is really,
Yeah.
really neat. And I think one thing I will say is if you're listening to this and you're like, I'd love to take that time off, but I don't have a team. I don't have all this. I don't have a team. And I scaled from, and I was 4 days a week. I scaled back to 3. And now I've decided this week, I'm like, I want 2.5 days. Right. And it's really finding for me, like the value in my vision is freedom. Right. And so I
Mhm.
found I'm like, if I make this level of income and I only have to work 2.5 days a week, that works for me because when we have that conversation of like, what are we growing for? Like, if
Yeah.
you want to grow to hit a certain amount, great. But for me, it was like, well, this is all I need to travel 4 months a year to live this lifestyle. And like, if I can do that in 2.5 days. So don't think that you have to have a team to make those changes. For me, it was cutting out like so many fluffy things that were not creating results. So if you put that, like, look at like, okay, if I'm posting on Instagram 8 times a week, am I creating clients from that? If I'm doing podcast interviews, what about my podcast? Like, what if I just did a bi-weekly pod? Like, there's so many things you can look at to make decisions off of too. Would you say like that? That's probably the way you'd go to is just looking at data and seeing what works.
I think so. Well, I was going to say too, as you were talking, you've changed your offers too. I know, right? Because I remember seeing like your calendar, you talk about just doing like back-to-back client calls for like, I think it was 2 days a week. And again, like it goes back to the way that you structure your offers because having your membership now, I imagine, is enabling you to keep working with the same number of clients, if not more,
Mhm.
with one call a week.
Yeah, one call a week. And you know what? The other thing I did was not long after we stopped working together, I moved to 30-minute calls. And my brain was
Mm.
like, oh my gosh, people are going to say that's half the value. It should be half the price. But I had a couple of clients say, oh, it's so nice not to have an hour meeting because it doesn't always take an hour. Sometimes it might take 40 minutes, but sometimes all you need is half an hour. Like if we're like, let's get down to business, what do we need help with? Let's go. I found that actually people like the 30-minute calls because it was very like, let's get in, let's start working, no chit chat, let's go. Um, and that was something I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wait a second. That was a huge unlock for me. So I've had a couple of them over the last few years, like add more value, but it doesn't necessarily mean more of me talking on screen. That doesn't
Yeah.
need to be the solution.
There's so much value you can add for your clients in your business that does not require your direct one-on-one time. And even I think you were talking about having like your Slack or Voxer or whatever you ended up doing with to have more like in between time that you can batch out, right? If you just open up and say, I'm going to take care of all the client questions during this block, like that is so much more efficient for you, but still providing value to them. And so that's why I say I always start there, because there's almost always things you can improve and just make your life so much easier if you have your offer structured the right way.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. So, Sarah, for someone who's like, okay, well, maybe I do need help with the back end of my business and I do need help with that. Where can people find you, learn more about you, get into your world and learn about what you have to offer?
Yeah, well, I have a podcast too. It is the Profit and Prosper podcast. Definitely go listen to that. And then I don't really know when this is coming out, but I have the High Profit Society is my newest program that I have that I adore. I love this and I can't wait to just keep growing it. But it is my community group for women who are wanting to grow their businesses, wanting to put more money in their bank accounts, but want to do it in a way that's profitable and in a way that allows you more of that time freedom. And so implementing the things that we're talking about to, make your business more sustainable and scalable. So you can go check that out at sarahhyoung.com/society. And then of course I'm on Instagram too. I do a lot of stories, like you said, on just random things. So that's it's Sarah Young.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for talking to us about this today. I just think that that is such an unlock if we're in that place where we're just like, I just don't have the time for it has to be my business or nothing. Like, I don't have the time. Then we really need to start looking at how our businesses are structured and realize like there is so much magic in stepping through that fear and rewriting what you want your business to look like so that you can have your health and your business. It's possible. But I think we just need to be willing to be uncomfortable and
Yep.
take those first steps.
It
Any last
absolutely is
words? Anything
possible.
you'd add?
No, no. I mean, it is possible. I think that if you're not, I always tell people, like, I think if you're not doing things that scare you, then to me, you're not pushing yourself. You're not necessarily living your life to the fullest extent that you can. So, I feel the fear and do it anyway. And it's definitely possible. But
I
thanks
love
for
it.
having me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on to the Becoming Limitless podcast. And for everyone listening, I'll leave all the links to everything Sarah talked about in the description. Tag us on Instagram if you found something really like resonated with this. We'd love to hear. Tag Sarah, tag me. I'll make sure our handles are in the description. But otherwise, I will talk to you next week. Bye. Want to know more about the Becoming Limitless program? Everything you need to know is linked in the description. You can head to my website at tanessashears.com to learn all about the program. Or if you're not ready to work together yet, you can check out my free podcast, Becoming Limitless. It's the go-to podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their brain and their body with biohacking.